Hey everybody, it's Dalton. I want to talk to you about bass basics. Just some basic things about bass fishing that I don't care if you're a beginner, if you're at the top of the game or somewhere in the middle, it makes no difference. You want to stay with the basics when it comes to bass fishing. And I'm going to break this up in basically three parts. The first part today I'm going to talk about rod, reel, and line. The next part is going to be about baits and bait selection. And then the third part, which to me is the hardest part of bass fishing, is finding fish. How do you find these bass? Before we do this, I want to talk to you about the power of advertising. Some years ago, Paris Hilton did a commercial or a series of commercials for Carl's Jr. And I don't know if you remember, she would come out in, like a tight swimsuit or, whatever it is, great shape, all that. And she was eating a big, juicy cheeseburger from Carl's Jr. Now, a couple things happens in advertising. One, I could imagine there were a lot of guys that went and bought a cheeseburger after that commercial. Two, if you eat cheeseburgers like that, you are not going to look like that. So it's just an advertiser's way of drawing attention to their product. I have no problem with advertising. They need to make money. Now, the same thing happens in bass fishing. Say you're watching a major league tournament. Commercial comes on. Here comes that $50,000 to $100,000 Ranger or Phoenix bass boat or Nitro or whatever it may be. And the idea behind that works in your brain sometimes is you think, if I don't have that boat, or if I don't have the most expensive electronics or rods and reels, I'm not going to be a good bass fisherman. Well, I'm going to let you know right now that is simply not true. So today I want to talk to you about rods, reels, and line. Now, back in July, I did a video on mid-range rods and reels. I just go over the price ranges that I pay for my rods and reels. I don't go super expensive, and I'm definitely not going super cheap. I always stay somewhere in the middle. Now, I've got 5 rods and reels generally that I fish with most of the time. I've got a 7-foot medium heavy here with 10-pound test fluorocarbon that I like to throw my crankbaits on. Okay, and I like that 10-pound test because those crankbaits can get down to the level I want. I got a 7-foot medium heavy here that I use a lot for my top waters, okay? And I also use it if I'm pitching and flipping. And one of my favorite rods is a 7-foot medium cranking rod. And the reason I like this rod so much, I'm going to show you this real quick, is it has a really good parabolic bend. So almost half this rod is a parabolic bend. And I like that when I'm throwing certain baits. Let me see if I can. I don't have much room in my garage here, but when I'm throwing certain baits like, goodness, swim baits, underspins, small crank baits, small spinner baits, all that kind of stuff. Now on my spinning tackle, my wife and I took about a 2-hour trip yesterday and went and bought 4 brand new spinning rods and reels. We had needed to upgrade. And so we went over to Tackle Warehouse in San Luis Obispo and we picked up some really, really nice rods and reels. Now this is an Okuma EVX series. I really like these rods. This is a 7-foot one. We also bought 6-foot 10 because I like shorter rods as well. And the reels we chose were the Mach Crush, the Mach 2 Crush reels. They're made by Luz. These are fantastic reels. This is the 300 series. I'll have this all in the description for you if it's something that you're interested in looking into, but it's a very light rod. Now here's the thing. The biggest thing I want to talk about when it comes to rods and reels is 2 things. One, comfort. It doesn't matter what brand you get, okay? These companies are out there competing with each other and they have really good brands. So what you want is comfort. You want to be able to feel good with that rod in your hand. You want some good sensitivity. The other thing that I want you to think about is control. This is your control of that bass. This is how you get him in the boat. Now this sounds really simple, but I got to tell you, a largemouth bass is notorious, the bigger ones, for jumping up out of the water and shaking their head from right to left. You're watching them do it. If you don't have that rod positioned right, he throws that lure out of his mouth. It goes 30 feet. He smiles at you and he's telling you, not today. That is so frustrating. You need to have control of that bass. Just real quick. If he jumps out of the water like that, don't keep your rod tip up. Get your rod tip down. Even if you put the tip of it in the water, it doesn't matter, because you're wanting to pull that bass in the water so he can't throw that lure out. So you want to have control. As far as reels, it's all about speed. For my bait casters, I use pretty much two speeds, 6/8 to 1, because I can speed it up or slow it down. And if I want more speed, I use 7/5 to 1. But they also have the 5 series of gear ratio, 5/3, 5/6, and all that means is you can reel a lot faster and the bait will move a whole lot slower. Now, let's real quick talk about line. Predominantly, all of my braid is Suffix 832. And for my leaders, just my leaders on my spinning rods, I use Berkeley Vanish. Never have any problems with it. If I'm going to take and spool a reel up with fluorocarbon, then I'm probably going to use the Sunline FC Sniper. It's a really good line. And they all range in prices, but these are predominantly the 3 lines that I use most of the time. Now, the other thing I do with my line, take my spinning rod for example, I got braid on here. I just put 15-pound braid on these spinning rods yesterday. And then I tie a knot and I have a fluorocarbon leader. This one has a 10-pound test fluorocarbon leader because that's what I like to throw my tubes on. Now, the name of the knot that I use for my spinning rods, is called an RP knot. I'll write that down for you so you can look it up. It really is an easy knot to tie. It's super strong, and you just have to practice with it a little bit. Another knot I use to tie braid to fluorocarbon or mono is what is called a uni to uni knot, and I'll have that on there for you too. Now, there's only a couple of times that I use monofilament now. If I have any type of a walking bait or a topwater bait, I'm going to put about 6 to 8 inches of monofilament so that the treble hooks don't get all tangled up in that braid. The other way is on a Carolina rig. I will generally use braid, put my weight and my swivel, and then my leader will be monofilament. There's a couple of reasons for that. Braid doesn't have any stretch, so I'm liable to pull that bait away from the bass. The other thing is the monofilament floats, so if you're using a small plastic, it's going to kind of help that bait go kind of like this on the bottom while you're dragging on that Carolina rig. So line choice is about size, what size when you need it. When I'm throwing super finesse, I'll go 8-pound test. When I'm throwing my tubes or heavier baits, I'll go 10-pound test. A lot of my crankbaits are going to be 10 to 12-pound test. My crankbaits, I rarely go over 12-pound test. So make sure that your rod is comfortable so that you can have that control of the bass. Gear ratio on bait casters are a big deal. I don't really trip as much on spinning rods. I just get the high gear ratios because I can always slow it down. And then your line. Figure out what kind of line you like. Stren makes good monofilament. I don't have it up here. Trilene makes good monofilament. FC Sniper fluorocarbon. Vanish fluorocarbon by Berkeley. And my favorite braid of all braid is Suffix 832. Stay with the basics in bass fishing. Have a decent rod, a decent reel, and some good line so that you can catch more bass and you have more control of that bass. By the way, the reason fluorocarbon is so good is that it's invisible to the bass, to where monofilament reflects light, so it's not. And the way you save money on fluorocarbon is you spool up your spinning reel with braided line anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20-pound test. It's real thin. Learn how to tie a good knot, and you can run fluorocarbon leaders and you will save yourself a ton of money on fluorocarbon. And by the way, when I spool these up, generally maybe once every 6 months to a year, depending on how much I've used, maybe 6 months to a year, I will not have to change that out. So it just saves money online all the way around. So get you some decent equipment, mid-range. Watch my video on mid-range rods and reels if you're getting into bass fishing. You don't have to go too cheap. You definitely don't have to go too expensive. Just get somewhere in the middle. Next video is going to be on baits and selecting them. And then the third video, the hardest part of bass fishing, finding those bass. I hope this video helps. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for tuning in.